Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Rowan. I'm 33 years old. My parents left me dying after brain surgery, pulled my hospital payment hours after I came out of recovery, and disappeared. And while I was still lying there, weak enough to need help lifting a cup of water, a man in a dark suit walked to my bedside, set a letter on my blanket, and said, "Your grandmother asked me to find you if this ever happened." At first, I thought I was hallucinating. That happens when your head is stapled. Your vision is still cloudy from anesthesia, and every sound in the room feels like it's arriving through water. The hospital ceiling was too white. The lights were too bright. My mouth tasted like metal. I had a line in my arm, a crushing ache behind my right eye, and the kind of weakness that makes even breathing feel supervised. I had just survived brain surgery. That part is important, because my parents liked to rewrite events later in ways that made their choices sound less monstrous. They would have said I was resting, recovering, stable. No, I was barely coherent, and they left anyway. The first sign something was wrong came from the nurses. Not what they said to me, what they said near me, in the kind of lowered voices people use when they think the patient is too medicated to understand. Payment authorization was reversed. By who? Her guarantors. After surgery? A pause, then the quiet answer. Apparently. I kept my eyes closed because that felt easier than opening them, easier than asking a question I already knew had only one answer. My parents had handled the billing. Not because I trusted them completely, because the surgery had been scheduled fast after my scans got worse, and my mother had stepped in with that brisk, competent tone she used when she wanted control to look like love. "Don't worry about paperwork, Natalie. Your father and I will take care of it." That was 2 days earlier. The morning of surgery, Mom kissed my forehead. Dad squeezed my shoulder. My younger brother Owen stood in the doorway scrolling on his phone, and my mother said, "He hates hospitals, don't take it personally." I remember trying to smile through the fear and saying, "I'm just glad you're all here." My mother answered, "Of course we are. We're family." Family. That word should have been engraved on the blade they used to cut me open. It would have been more honest than the bracelet around my wrist. I finally opened my eyes when one of the nurses came close enough for me to see the concern on her face. She was maybe in her 40s, kind eyes, tired posture, the sort of woman who had probably seen more family betrayals than the hospital brochure would ever admit. "Natalie?" she asked softly. My throat felt scraped raw. "Where are my parents?" She hesitated. That was enough. I swallowed and tried again. "Did they leave?" Her silence shifted into professionalism so fast it almost hurt more. "They're not here right now." "Did they pull the payment?" Another pause. Then she said very carefully, "The financial office is trying to reach the authorized parties." Authorized parties. My own life had been turned into a customer service phrase. I looked toward the door. No flowers, no mother, no father, no brother. Just a plastic water pitcher, a monitor beeping steadily beside me, and the awful realization that while I had been under anesthesia with my skull open, my parents had decided I was no longer worth covering. I wish I could say that realization shocked me. It did. But it did not come from nowhere. In my family, illness had always been treated like an inconvenience unless it belonged to the right child. When Owen broke his wrist at 14, my mother slept upright in a recliner beside his bed for 2 nights and told relatives he had been so brave. When I had migraines in college and started blacking out during finals, she told me not to be dramatic and asked if stress was making me attention-seeking. Even when the neurologist found the mass, my parents reacted like I had brought them an expensive scheduling conflict. Dad's first question was, "How long is recovery?" Mom's was worse. "Will this affect your ability to work long-term?" Not "Are you scared?" Not "Are you in pain?" Not "Thank God they found it." Just whether my damaged brain would become an inconvenience with overhead. The surgery happened fast. After that, the doctor said the pressure had increased. He wanted me admitted immediately. I called my parents from the hospital parking lot, hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped my phone. Mom arrived first with a tote bag, a sweater I hadn't asked for, and her public voice already turned on. Dad came later, carrying paperwork. I remember him flipping through the forms and saying, "Good thing your grandmother set aside money for emergencies." That line stayed with me, because Grandma had died 8 months earlier, and because her money had apparently become family language for whatever my parents wanted to touch next. Grandma June was the only person in my life who ever looked at me and saw the difference between being quiet and being weak. She used to say, "Your parents always mistake the child who asks for less as the child who deserves less." She said it once in her garden while pinching dead roses off a bush, like she was commenting on the weather. At the time, I laughed. I don't laugh at it anymore. By late afternoon, a woman from billing came into my room with a sympathetic smile and a clipboard she clearly hated carrying. She started with, "There's just a temporary issue," which is how people introduce disasters when they don't want your blood pressure monitor proving you heard them correctly. I was still trying to sit up when the door opened again. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, mid-60s, silver hair, black briefcase. The kind of calm expression people wear when they are about to confirm your life is not what the room has been telling you. He walked straight to my bedside, set a thick cream envelope on my blanket, and said, "Natalie Rowan, my name is Daniel Mercer. Your grandmother asked me to find you if this ever happened." The nurse from billing stopped talking. I stared at him. Not because I didn't understand the sentence, because some part of me did. Too quickly, too completely. As if my grandmother had been preparing for my parents to abandon me long before I was ready to admit she had reason to. I looked down at the envelope. My name was written across the front in Grandma's handwriting, and for the first time since waking up from surgery, I felt something stronger than pain. I felt dread with proof attached to it. The man in the dark suit did not ask if he could sit. He looked at the nurse first. Not rudely, not like he owned the room, just with the quiet authority of someone who understood that in a hospital, every sentence can become a record. "Before we discuss anything further," he said, "is Ms. Rowan medically cleared to make decisions?" The billing woman shifted beside the door. The nurse answered, "She's awake and oriented. Tired, but she understands." "Good," he said. Then he pulled the chair close to my bed, sat down, and placed a business card on the blanket beside the envelope. "Daniel Mercer, attorney at law, Estate and Trust Administration." I stared at the card because the letters were easier to look at than his face. "My grandmother is dead," I said. "I know," he replied gently. "I represented her for 19 years. That made my eyes burn. 19 years meant he had known her before the hospital bed, before the funeral, before my parents started using her name like a wallet they had inherited early. He opened his briefcase and removed a folder with a blue tab. "Your grandmother left standing instructions related to your medical care." I almost laughed, but it came out like a broken breath. "My medical care?" "Yes. My parents told me she left money for family emergencies." Daniel's face changed just slightly. Not surprise, confirmation. "She did," he said. "But she also defined whose emergencies counted." The room went very still. Even the billing woman stopped pretending to organize her clipboard. Daniel turned one page toward me. At the top were the words, "Emergency Medical Reserve, Natalie Rowan." My name. Not family, not children, not future needs. Me. I tried to lift my hand toward the page, but my fingers barely moved. The nurse noticed and helped adjust the bed a little higher. That small kindness almost undid me. Daniel spoke quietly. "Your grandmother became concerned 3 years ago when she learned your parents had discouraged you from pursuing additional neurological testing." I closed my eyes. Of course she knew. Grandma always knew the things people tried to make sound normal. The first MRI had been delayed because my mother said specialists were expensive and migraines ran in families. The second appointment was pushed back because Owen had wrecked his car and needed help with repairs. When I finally fainted in a grocery store aisle, Grandma was the one who drove me to urgent care while my mother texted that I was spiraling again. Daniel continued. She told me, and I'm quoting her, "If Natalie ever needs real care, her parents will call it overreacting until the bill arrives. Then they will call it unfair." A tear slid into my hairline. I hated crying lying down. It made grief feel trapped. He reached into the folder and removed another document. "This morning, shortly after your surgery began, your parents executed authorization as guarantors for the hospital payment. 4 hours later, after the procedure was completed, they reversed the payment and requested release of funds back to their account." The billing woman whispered, "Mr. Mercer." He looked at her. "Is any part of that incorrect?" She swallowed. "No." I looked at the ceiling. For a moment, I could not feel my body at all. Not the staples, not the line in my arm, not the pain behind my eye. Just absence. My parents had waited until I survived the part where a surgeon opened my skull. Then they pulled the money. That timing said everything. They did not abandon me because they thought I would die. They abandoned me once they knew I might live long enough to become expensive. Daniel placed one more paper on the blanket. "This is the current hospital balance, including surgery, ICU recovery, imaging, anesthesia, and post-operative care. $280,000. The number looked unreal, too large to belong to a human body. I whispered, "I can't pay that." "No," Daniel said, "you won't." I opened my eyes. He took a pen from his pocket, signed a document already prepared, and handed it to the billing woman. "Payment is being issued from the Rowan Medical Trust under Eleanor Hayes's instructions. The full $280,000 will be covered today. Any future communication regarding Ms. Rowan's balance comes through my office until she is discharged and represented." The billing woman looked relieved in the way people look when a disaster becomes someone else's department. She left quickly. The nurse stayed. I think she wanted to make sure I wasn't alone when the room finally understood what had happened. Daniel waited until the door closed. Then he touched the cream envelope with 2 fingers. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this before I explain anything else." "My parents pulled the payment," I said, still unable to move past it. "Did they know about the trust?" "Yes." That word hurt more than the surgery. Then why would they do it? Daniel's expression grew careful. "Because they believed they could force a choice before anyone notified me." "What choice?" He paused. "Your mother called my office this morning while you were in surgery. She asked whether your grandmother's medical reserve could be redirected to Owen because, in her words, you were already being treated." My heart monitor changed. The nurse stepped closer. I barely heard her. "Owen?" Daniel nodded once. "For what?" He looked at the file, then back at me. "A business purchase. Commercial space for a fitness studio. The deposit deadline was today." For a second, I thought the anesthesia had bent the sentence. My parents had pulled payment from my brain surgery so my brother could buy a gym. Not even for his health. Not for survival. For his dream. There are betrayals so obscene your mind refuses to give them shape at first. It walks around them like furniture in the dark. Owen had always been their investment. Not because he was brilliant. He wasn't. Not because he was kind. He wasn't that either. He was charming in the way careless men can be charming when everyone around them pays the consequences before they reach him. Owen failed upward through life on my parents' hands. Dropped classes became finding himself. Debt became building credit. Bad decisions became entrepreneurial risk. My medical scans became drama. His third business idea became destiny. Daniel slid the envelope closer. The movement pulled me back to the room. Grandma's handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. "Natalie, if they make you pay for surviving." I could not open it. Not right away. My fingers were too weak and my heart was too loud. The nurse opened it for me after I nodded. She unfolded the letter and placed it where I could see. Daniel read aloud only after asking permission. I nodded again. His voice was steady. My dearest Natalie, if Daniel is reading this to you, then your parents have finally done the thing I feared most. They have made your pain compete with your brother's convenience, and they have expected you to lose quietly. I turned my face toward the window. The sky outside was gray. Grandma's words filled the room. I am sorry I could not stop it earlier. I am sorry I mistook your silence at times for safety. But I never mistook their behavior for love. That line broke something in me. Not loudly, cleanly. Daniel continued, your mother will say she was overwhelmed. Your father will say he was making practical decisions. Owen will say he never asked for any of this. Remember this, sweetheart. People do not have to ask for a throne if everyone keeps building one underneath them. The nurse wiped under one eye and looked away. I almost smiled through tears because Grandma had always been lethal when she was right. Then Daniel reached the last paragraph on the first page. I created this reserve because I knew they would one day measure your life against someone else's want. If that day has come, do not beg them to choose you. Let the paperwork show they already chose. Daniel lowered the letter. There is a second page, he said. My throat tightened. Read it. He turned it over. If they have reversed payment after treatment began, Daniel is instructed to pay the full medical balance immediately, secure your discharge plan, and begin review of all withdrawals made from my estate accounts in the 8 months after my death. My eyes moved to his face. Daniel did not look surprised. He had been waiting for me to hear it. All withdrawals? I whispered. Yes. Why? He closed the folder halfway. Because your grandmother suspected the medical reserve was not the first thing they tried to take from you. The machines kept beeping. The nurse adjusted my blanket, and lying there with my head bandaged, my body weak, and my grandmother's letter open on my chest, I understood that the surgery had only removed one dangerous thing from my skull. The rest of the sickness had been sitting in my family for years. Daniel did not leave after paying the bill. That was the first difference between him and everyone else in my family. My parents had always treated money like the end of responsibility. If they paid for something, they owned the story. If they refused to pay, they called it boundaries. If I needed help, the help came with a lesson attached. Daniel paid $280,000 and then asked the nurse, what does she need next? Not what does she owe? Not when can she leave? What does she need? I turned my face away because that question hurt more than the incision. The nurse, whose name was Marissa, explained my discharge could not happen safely without at least several days of monitoring, medication management, follow-up imaging, and someone reliable to help at home. Daniel wrote everything down. Home support, he asked. Marissa looked at me. I looked at the blanket. My parents were supposed to take me home. The room went quiet. Daniel closed his pen. Then they will not be part of the discharge plan. I wanted to laugh, but my throat closed around it. It sounded so simple when he said it, as if families could be removed from a form the same way you remove an old address. A few hours later, he returned with another woman. Her name was Patrice, a patient advocate. She spoke softly, but with the kind of precision that made panic feel less contagious. She explained home health options, short-term rehabilitation, medication delivery, transportation, legal authorization, and something called a care coordinator. I listened through waves of pain and exhaustion. Then I said, how am I supposed to afford all that? Daniel opened the blue tabbed folder again. Your grandmother anticipated recovery too. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. My parents had anticipated leverage. Grandma had anticipated care. That evening, my phone finally started ringing. Mom, Dad, Owen, then Mom again. I watched the screen light up from the tray table, beside my bed. It felt strange to see their names after what had happened, like watching burglars knock politely after leaving through the window. Daniel was still there, reviewing paperwork by the window. "Do you want to answer?" he asked. "No." The word came out faster than I expected. My mother sent a text at 7:22. "Natalie, call me before you let that lawyer confuse you." A second text followed. "We were trying to handle things as a family." Then Dad, "You don't know the whole situation." And finally Owen, "This is getting blown way out of proportion." That one made me stare. Blown out of proportion. My head had been opened. My parents had pulled payment. A lawyer had paid more than a house in some towns to keep me from being financially destroyed after surgery. And Owen thought the issue was proportion. Daniel asked permission before photographing the messages. I nodded. He sent them to himself, then said, "Your grandmother told me your brother would call harm inconvenience if it slowed him down." I whispered, "She knew him too. She knew all of you." That sentence should have comforted me. Instead, it made me grieve harder, because being known by the one person who protected you becomes complicated after she is gone. It is beautiful, yes, but it also leaves you staring at everyone who stayed and wondering why love was so difficult for them when she made it look obvious. The next morning, my parents came, not quietly. I heard my mother's voice in the hallway before the door opened. "I am her mother. She just had brain surgery. You cannot keep me from my daughter." Marissa stepped in first, her face carefully neutral. "Natalie, your parents are here. Do you want visitors?" That was the first time anyone asked me, not informed me, asked me. I looked at Daniel. He said nothing. That mattered. He did not push me toward forgiveness or drama. He waited for my answer like it belonged to me. I said, "They can come in if he stays." Marissa nodded. My mother entered wearing the same blue cardigan she had worn on surgery morning. It made me angry in a way I couldn't explain, as if continuity of clothing could pretend continuity of care. Dad came behind her, jaw tight. Owen hovered in the doorway, tan, healthy, expensive watch on his wrist, looking irritated to be inside a hospital for someone else again. Mom rushed to the bed. "Sweetheart." I flinched before I could hide it. She noticed. So did Daniel. Her face rearranged itself into hurt. "Natalie, don't look at me like that." I stared at her. "How should I look at you?" Dad stepped forward. "This has been a misunderstanding." Daniel stood from the chair. "No, it has been documented." Dad's eyes went to him. "And you are?" "Daniel Mercer, Eleanor Hayes' attorney." Mom's face went pale at Grandma's name, not with grief, with recognition. Owen frowned. "Why is Grandma's lawyer here?" I looked at him. "Because she knew." He gave a short laugh. "Knew what?" Daniel answered calmly. "That your parents might attempt to redirect Natalie's medical reserve toward you." Owen's mouth opened, then closed. My mother whispered, "That is not fair." I almost smiled. Fair. That word had been missing when they pulled the payment. Dad said, "We only paused it." Daniel opened the folder. "You reversed the authorization after surgery was completed." "We intended to fix it." "With what funds?" Daniel asked. Dad's face hardened. Mom started crying. "Your brother had a deadline, Natalie. He was going to lose the building." "The building," I repeated. My voice sounded distant. "You pulled payment from my brain surgery because Owen wanted a building." Owen snapped. "It wasn't like that." I turned my head toward him slowly. The movement hurt, but I wanted to see his face when I said it. "Then what was it like?" He looked at Mom. That was his answer. He had never needed to build his own defense. Someone always arrived with one. Daniel placed a copy of Grandma's letter on the tray table. Mom saw the handwriting and froze. Dad saw the legal header and went still. Owen saw nothing except that the room was no longer bending around him. Daniel said, "Eleanor instructed a review of estate withdrawals if this event occurred. That review has started." Mom's tears stopped. Completely. That scared me more than the crying. Dad said, "You have no authority to do that." "I have the authority your mother gave me," Daniel said. "And now that Natalie is alert, she can decide whether to cooperate with the review." All three of them looked at me. There it was. The old room, the old pressure, Mom's wet eyes, Dad's anger, Owen's wounded disbelief, the family waiting for me to make the painful thing easier by becoming reasonable again. My body was broken, my head was bandaged, my voice was barely stronger than breath. But I heard Grandma's line in my mind as clearly as if she were standing beside the bed. "Do not beg them to choose you. Let the paperwork show they already chose." I looked at Daniel. "What do you need from me?" Mom made a sound like I had slapped her. Daniel's voice stayed calm. Permission to request account records, hospital communications, and any estate disbursements made under the claim of family emergency. I looked back at my parents. Dad's face had changed. Mom's had emptied. Owen suddenly looked less confused than afraid, and that was when I understood. The medical payment was not the first betrayal. It was just the first one that happened while witnesses were watching. I said, "You have my permission." My mother sat down. That was the first sign the room had shifted. She did not faint. She did not protest. She did not reach for my hand. She simply lowered herself into the chair beside the bed, like her knees had stopped trusting her. Owen looked at her. "Mom?" She did not look back. Dad did. "Enough," he said. "Natalie is recovering. This is not the time." Daniel closed the folder. "Actually," he said, "your timing is the reason we are here." That sentence hit the room cleanly. For years, my father had controlled conflict by deciding when it was appropriate to discuss pain. If I brought something up during dinner, I was ruining the meal. If I brought it up later, I was holding a grudge. If I brought it up calmly, I was calculating. If I cried, I was unstable. There was never a right time to name what they did. Only endless wrong times chosen by the people doing it. Daniel stepped closer to the foot of my bed. The review does not require an argument in this room, but since all parties are present, I will be clear. Eleanor's medical reserve was legally designated for Natalie's care. Any attempt to redirect it without authorization will be documented. Any estate funds already redirected under false emergency claims will be examined. Mom covered her mouth. Owen said, "False emergency?" Daniel looked at him. "Your fitness studio deposit was listed as a family emergency." Owen's face flushed. "I didn't write that." "No," Daniel said, "but you were the beneficiary." Owen took a step back like the word had touched him. Beneficiary. People like my brother loved gifts until someone used the correct name for them. Dad's voice dropped. "You're making accusations without context." Daniel nodded once. "Then provide it." The room went quiet. I almost laughed, because context was my parents' favorite word when nobody asked them for details. Now that someone had opened space for it, they had nothing ready that could survive being written down. Mom finally looked at me. "Natalie, sweetheart, we were scared." I stared at her. "Of what?" She blinked. "Of losing you?" The words came too late and arrived too clean, like flowers from a gas station after the funeral. I looked at the monitor beside me, at the IV line in my arm, at the dried antiseptic near my temple, at the woman who had left my payment hanging in a billing office while she worried about Owen's building. "You pulled the money after surgery," I said. Her face crumpled. "Your father said it would be fixed before you woke up." Dad snapped, "Linda." There it was, not an apology, a leak. Daniel wrote something down. Owen looked between them. "Wait, you said Natalie had already been covered." Nobody answered him. The silence did. For the first time, Owen was not just being protected by the lie. He was inside it, looking around. He turned to Dad. "You told me Grandma's money was just sitting there." Dad's jaw clenched. Mom whispered, "We were going to replace it." With what? I asked. She looked at me helplessly. That helplessness made me colder than her excuses, because I had seen my mother become competent for Owen 1,000 times. She could find money, make calls, negotiate, pressure relatives, cry to the right person, flatter the next. She became helpless only when the person needing rescue was me. Daniel opened another section of the file. There are already preliminary concerns, he said. 3 estate transfers marked as household stabilization, 1 marked as Owen Business Bridge, 2 marked as Natalie Medical Consultation. I tried to turn my head too quickly. Pain shot behind my eye. Marissa touched my shoulder. Slowly. I breathed through it. Daniel waited until I nodded. Medical consultation? I asked. He looked at my parents. Would either of you like to explain those? Dad's face hardened into something ugly and familiar. She never went without care. That was such a careful sentence. Not she received the money, not we spent it on her. She never went without care. Daniel turned 1 page. One of those transfers was made 2 weeks after Natalie canceled a neurologist appointment. I remembered that appointment. I had canceled it because Mom told me the insurance situation was messy, and I should wait until she sorted it out. Then Owen posted a picture from a new equipment expo in Denver. The memory arrived slowly. Then, all at once. That paid for his trip, I whispered. Owen's voice came small. What trip? The Denver expo, I said. He shook his head. Mom said Dad paid for that. Mom began crying again, but this time no one moved toward her. Not Dad, not Owen, not me. There are tears that ask for comfort and tears that reveal strategy. My mother had used both for years. The difference was now we had documents on the table. Daniel's voice stayed even. This review will continue outside this room. Natalie needs rest. Dad pointed at me. If you do this, you are destroying this family. I looked at him for a long second. My body was so weak I could not sit upright without help. My skull ached. My throat was dry. My future had become a stack of medication schedules and follow-up scans. But somehow, in that moment, I felt steadier than he looked. No, I said. You just hate that I survived with a witness. That silenced him. Not because it was poetic, because it was true. Marissa stepped forward. Visiting time is over. Mom stood slowly. Natalie, please. I closed my eyes, not because I was afraid of her, because I was done letting her face decide my guilt. Leave, I said. The word was barely above a whisper, but everyone heard it. Owen was the last one at the door. He looked back at me, and for the first time in my life, he did not look annoyed. He looked afraid of the family that had built him. After they left, Daniel stayed by the window while Marissa adjusted my medication. The room settled into hospital sounds again. Beeps, wheels in the hallway, a distant announcement over the speaker. I thought I would feel victorious. I didn't. I felt hollow. That is the part stories do not always explain. When the truth finally enters a room, it does not immediately fill the space. Sometimes it just removes the lie and you sit there feeling how much of your life had been built around it. Daniel seemed to understand. He placed Grandma's letter back within reach and said, "There is one more thing your grandmother left for you." I opened my eyes. "More paperwork?" "No," he said. He reached into his briefcase and removed a small velvet pouch. Inside was a key on a brass tag. I stared at it. "What is that?" "Her cottage," he said. "She instructed that once you were medically stable, you were not to recover under your parents' roof." The key was small, ordinary, almost ridiculous against the size of everything else. But when Daniel placed it in my palm, I cried harder than I had all day. Because money had saved my surgery, documents had saved my truth, but that key saved something softer. It saved me from waking up in the same house as the people who had decided my survival was negotiable. Daniel said, "There is a care plan attached to the trust, home health, transportation, medication support, follow-up care. Your grandmother was very specific." I closed my hand around the key. Of course she was. Grandma had understood something my parents never had. Survival is not the same as being safe. And lying in that hospital bed with my head bandaged and my whole family finally outside the door, I realized the real inheritance was not the $280,000. It was the first place I could heal without owing anyone my silence. I stayed in the hospital 9 more days, not because the surgery went wrong, because for the first time, the people making decisions around me were not trying to get me out quickly enough to make me useful again. Marissa checked on me even when she did not have to. Patrice arranged home health visits. Daniel came every afternoon with updates, never staying too long, never turning my room into a courtroom. The review moved quietly at first. That was how Daniel preferred things. No dramatic threats, no shouting. Just requests, records, dates, signatures, transfers. And then the truth began doing what truth does when people have been sloppy with it. It multiplied. The 2 Natalie medical consultation transfers had not gone to doctors. One paid for Owen's Denver business trip. The other covered a deposit on equipment for the fitness studio he had not even opened yet. The household stabilization payments went into my parents' joint account and then moved out in pieces. Credit cards, a bathroom renovation, Owen's truck repairs. Every time Daniel told me another detail, I waited for the pain to surprise me. It didn't. That was the strangest part. The surgery had cut something out of my head, but the review cut something out of my memory. The fog, the excuses, the maybe they meant well, the maybe I misunderstood. By the time I was discharged, I did not feel confused anymore. I felt tired and cleanly angry. Daniel drove me to Grandma's cottage himself. It sat at the end of a narrow road lined with pine trees, small and white with blue shutters, the kind of place I had visited as a child and never realized had been waiting for me. There were groceries in the refrigerator, clean sheets on the bed, medication instructions on the kitchen counter, and a note in Grandma's handwriting taped to the inside of the front door. Rest here before anyone asks you to carry them again. I stood there with my walker, my bandaged head, my hospital bag on the floor, and cried so hard Daniel quietly stepped outside and pretended to check his phone. The first weeks were not pretty. Recovery is not cinematic. It is pill alarms at 3 a.m. It is nausea. It is crying because your hand shakes while brushing your teeth. It is forgetting a word you know and panicking that your brain will never be yours again. But nobody in that cottage called me dramatic. Nobody asked when I would be back to normal. Nobody needed my pain to become convenient. A home health nurse came 3 times a week. Patrice handled appointments. Daniel handled the case. Grandma's trust paid for the care exactly as she had ordered. My parents tried to reach me constantly at first. Mom left voicemails that began with sobbing and ended with blame. Your father made the financial part sound temporary. You know I would never want you harmed. Owen was under so much pressure. Then, finally, one that told the truth by accident. Natalie, you have to understand. We thought you would be fine. I saved that one. Not because I needed it legally, because it was the whole family system in one sentence. They thought I would be fine. Fine enough to delay treatment. Fine enough to lose money. Fine enough to forgive. Fine enough to survive whatever they took. Because I always had. Daniel's review became formal after that. My parents were removed from every role connected to Grandma's estate. They were required to repay the misused funds to the trust, including the money redirected toward Owen's studio. The hospital matter never became a public trial, but it did become a permanent record in the estate file. Owen lost the building. For a while, he told people I had destroyed his dream from a hospital bed. Then Daniel sent one letter to his business partner with the documented timeline. After that, Owen got quieter. My father retired early from his accounting job after 2 longtime clients heard enough to stop trusting him with family money. My mother sold the renovated house and moved into a smaller place across town. She sent me one handwritten letter 6 months later. It was short. I keep thinking about what your grandmother wrote. I keep trying to remember when I stopped seeing your pain as pain. I read it twice. Then I placed it in a drawer. Not forgiven, not burned, just no longer running my life. As for me, I learned how to heal slowly. I walked farther each week. First to the mailbox, then to the end of the driveway, then down the road under the pines. My hair grew back unevenly near the scar. I bought soft scarves, then stopped wearing them when I got tired of hiding proof that I had survived. The first time I cooked in Grandma's kitchen, I made toast and soup and had to sit down halfway through. I laughed, then I cried. Then I finished the soup. That became my recovery in miniature. Stop. Breathe. Continue. One afternoon, almost a year after the surgery, Daniel brought me the final accounting. Everything had been restored to the medical trust. The care plan would continue as needed. The cottage was transferred fully into my name. At the bottom of the packet was one final letter from Grandma. Natalie, if you are reading this in the cottage, then you lived. Do not waste that miracle trying to make your parents feel less guilty for what they chose. A life saved is not a debt. It is a door. Walk through it. I sat at the kitchen table with that letter in my hands for a long time. Then I opened every window in the cottage. The pine air came in cold and clean. For years, my family treated my survival like something they could spend, delay, redirect, or explain away. But Grandma had known better. She knew love was not the person who cried loudest at the hospital bed. Love was the person who prepared a way out before the wound ever opened. And in the end, my parents did not leave me dying. They left me exposed. Grandma left me protected. Thank you for being here. If you were in Natalie's place, would you ever answer your parents again after they pulled payment from your surgery to fund your brother's dream? And if your grandmother had left you proof, protection, and a place to heal, would you fight for the truth or disappear into peace? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to see you in the next one.